Hello and welcome students, staff, faculty, and community members to this evening's event. I am Carlos Tavares, Dean of Institutional Effectiveness here at Mount San Jacinto College. We are very excited about tonight's presentation by San Bernardino Valley College Professor Ed Gomez. It is great to have him here at MSJC tonight, even if it is a virtual visit. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors, beginning with the Student Equity and Achievement Committee, particularly the leadership of that team, Executive Dean Rebecca Teague and Dean Alma Ramirez. I also want to thank the group that put this event together, the Latinx Indigenous Alliance here at MSJC, and particularly the leader of that group, Professor Elias Escamilla, who's here with us tonight. I also want to thank, and I just want to say that this really was a team effort, and many people in the Latinx Indigenous Alliance really helped out to make this event happen tonight. I want to give a special thanks to Student Life and Development personnel, Jose Hernandez and Susana Ortega, for all their help with the flyers and the technical aspects of tonight. And Jose is here with us as well. Before we begin, I'd like you to join me while I read a short land acknowledgement. We want to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered here tonight. The land on which MSJC operates has been the site of human activity for thousands of years. This area has been home to many indigenous communities. Today, this land is still home to many indigenous people, including the Pechanga, Soboba, Mission, De Sueño, Morongo, and Torres Martinez tribes and nations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Tavares. Appreciate that introduction. I also want to acknowledge Cynthia Garcia. She's my colega and also the secretary for the Latinx Indigenous Alliance. She's also here with us as well. Also our distinguished John Torres, anthropology instructor for the San Jacinto campus. He's been with us for a number of years. We appreciate his presence with us here today. But last but not least, we want to introduce our main event speaker that will be with us today, speaking today, Professor Ed Gomez. I'm going to go ahead and read a short bio that I have from him, and then we'll go right into the conversation. Professor Ed Gomez has taught at Palomar College, Mount San Jacinto Community College, Menifee Campus, San Bernardino Valley College, Cal State LA, and UC Riverside. Professor Gomez has given speeches and or presentations at Dines College, previously known as Navajo Community College, CSU San Bernardino, CSU LA, Stanford University, Howard University, UC Berkeley, UCLA, and UC Santa Barbara. Professor Gomez has also served on the University of California Board of Regents, SBCCDTA President, which is San Bernardino College, I'm assuming that's what it is, CCA, and President of Latino Faculty, the Administrator Association for SBCCD, Chair of Human Relations Committee of the City of Redlands, UC Riverside Native American Alumni Association. Professor Gomez has also taught Introduction to American Indian Law and Policy, American Indian Law and Policy in the 20th Century, Introduction to Native American History, the History of San Manuel Nations, Sereno Indian History, Chicano History, U.S. History, Introduction to the History of Latin America, History of California, History of American of the West, and Introduction to World History. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be so kind to give us our full attention to Professor Ed Gomez from San Bernardino Valley College, who is our guest speaker today. So go ahead and unmute yourself and come on in, Professor Ed.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Escamilla. I want to thank you all for putting this together. As I was saying to you before the actual presentation here, it's a much needed thing that people should be doing all the time. And I'm really proud that MSJC has done this. As you can see, I'm a past professor at MSJC over at your Menifee campus a long time ago when it was just a baby campus, and I've watched it grow. So kudos to you guys for all the good work that you're doing, and I certainly appreciate that. I'd like to get into the discussion if I can quickly, so I'm going to share my screen with you with some notes. So if you're out there watching and you want to kind of take some notes, or you just want to kind of look at what I'm putting up on the screen as my the information where I'm getting my sources from and all that stuff, I'll put that up. So let me do that real quickly. I'm not a computer genius, but if you guys will just let me share with you, hopefully I can pull it up and share with you right there. So if you can see that, I hope you can. It gives you an idea of where I'm going and what I'm going to be talking about. And before I start, I do want to just say that when I was asked by Professor Escamilla to talk about something and a topic that he thought would be of great importance to the Native community, and particularly to students and educators and people like that, I really thought it would be important to talk about what I'm going to be looking at today, which is the need for Native American studies to be incorporated at all levels of education. And so I kind of got that topic, and then I talked to him about it. He seemed excited about that, so that's where we're going today. So let me start out with why did I choose this topic? And there's several different reasons. First of all, my teaching career has brought me to many different students. At this point, I'm figuring I've probably taught maybe 35,000 students, and that's quite a few students to have taught over the years. And during those times, I've listened to students, tried to understand what they were talking about and where they were coming from. I noticed there was an absence of understanding about the Native community, and that affected how they reacted and dealt with Native people. And so one of the pushing reasons behind this topic is I think my career now is coming towards the latter part of it, and I would like to share some of my lessons, my life lessons with people to maybe give them the opportunity. So I am not an expert. I don't expect to give you all the answers. What I do expect is hopefully that you will listen, you will take some of what I say to heart, and what we're going to do this evening will hopefully open up a dialogue in our communities and a dialogue in our schools to begin to think about what our role as educators is. Second reason why I think it's an important, and we were talking a little bit about this before the actual presentation, the world conditions that we face are something that I think is on the minds of most of us. And I think that through understanding or through trying to incorporate understandings from other people's perspectives, some of the issues that we're currently dealing with may be of benefit for us to look at this. And I'll just list a couple that when we think only in one way, in the Western way, and the way that most of us are educated through the processes of the school systems that we grow up in the United States or anywhere in the Western world, we are really programmed to think in a certain way. And I try to tell my students that they can only think in the way they've been taught to think, and without alternatives to understanding about the world and the issues around us, there's really only that one way to reach it. So the world conditions that we currently face, that I believe studying a Native American perspective may actually help us, or would at least give us an alternative to what we currently have. Obviously, environmental issues are of great concern. Gender issues are of great concern. Racial issues are of great concern. We have all kinds of problems in our political aspects currently, where worlds are being torn apart. The economic understandings of this earth that have led to destruction. There are so many things that I believe now more than ever, we really do need to incorporate other aspects of other people's understandings from around the world in order to, number or letter C here, to have hope for tomorrow. And that's really why I became a teacher. Some of you may know or don't know that I originally thought that someday I'd be a rock star. And I came to California with that in my head and my heart, but I was called in a different direction. And that call was because I felt that there would be something that I could do in my life to maybe make a change in the way people thought, the way they acted towards each other, and the consideration that they would give each other. And so tonight, I would hope that from my heart to yours, that I could present you with some ideas, some of which maybe you won't agree with, Maybe some of them are things you've never heard or wanted to hear, but I'm bringing this in a good way, hopefully to you this evening, to understand why we would maybe want to incorporate the level of Native American studies into all of our levels of education. And by that, I mean from preschool all the way to university, okay? So let's get into it. When I was talking to Professor Escamilla before this was all started, I said to him, part of the reason why I think this is important is most people have no understanding of Native American history in our society, and they have no understanding probably of the historical role that education has played. So education has been a part of Native American communities long before other people intruded upon these continents. And the idea that somebody's education is now going to be given to the American Indian people as some sort of gift or whatever like that is really a miscommunication and a misunderstanding by the Western world. So I'm going to do a very brief, because we do not have the time for me to lay out an entire set of what I would want to tell you, but hopefully people who are interested in education, are open to ideology, will listen to what I'm going to lay out here at the very beginning to show you that what role education from the Western world has played in Native America has never been one for the benefit of the Native American people. It has traditionally been one not to the benefit of Native people. And therefore, we must understand that where we stand in 2020 is with this behind us, hundreds of years of action. And I tell my students that when in fact you look at something, it could be an anomaly. But if you can go back to 1776 per se, and women were not equal to men, and you can go back to 1800 and women were not equal to men, and you can go back to 1850 and women were not equal to men, and you can go back to 1900 and women were not equal to men, and you can go back to 1950 and women were not equal to men, and you can go back to 2020 and women were not equal to men. That's not an anomaly. That's not an anomaly. It is part of the fabric of America. And so what I'd like to present in my very first part this evening is a fabric of America. What role did Western education play for Native American people? My first assertion is that it was a purposeful de-education because Native people had education. For us to believe that because it was not structured in the same manner in which you and I exist in our schools and our colleges and our universities, that somehow it was lesser or non-existent, again, is misinformation. And so the purposeful de-education and then what I call re-education of Native Americans was done from the very beginning of this country and its settlements by those of Western European descent. As we look here, you can see that in 1617, which is barely 10 years after the very first English colony of Jamestown was created, English collected a fund from the colonists to build what they call a school for Indians and an Indian college. And the purpose that they put in their own writing was not to share ideologies, was not to build bridges and learn from each other. The purpose was that of converting and conversion from one to their way. In 1654, and again, remember, this is a very loosely knit list of times, but I can't go all night, so I'm just trying to give you a little bit background so maybe you'll understand the point of the de-education and the re-education. In 1654, Harvard College created a school of higher education for, and I quote, training of Indian minds. So clearly, from the very beginning, the purpose of education was not to share ideologies and learn from each other, but was to take one perspective and put it into the minds of everybody else. In 1793, 1801, and 1804, Congress allotted monies as a reward for educational services to Indian allies, to give them, if you will, educational monies for them to come to schools within the colonial and United States regions. In 1819 and 1820, the United States creates what's called the Civilization Fund, as if they are some way able to decide for other people on the earth what civilization is, and therefore their definition is in fact the only definition of civilization. They created a civilization fund for the so-called frontier Indians. as they moved westward and displaced Native American people, dispossessed them of their land, took away all their culture and the things that were part of who they were, and tried to, if you will, destroy them, these frontier Indians were faced again with the purposeful de-education and a purposeful re-education by the United States government and the American people. By 1830s, they'll try a new method. This new method is known as the manual labor schools. Anybody who knows what manual labor is, I did it much of my youth and into my younger part of my life while I was going to college. Manual labor is the backbreaking labor. And manual labor schools were opened and became the popular institutions when dealing with American Indian people, AKA forced labor of Native people. To take people from their original understandings of education, destroy that, and try to force upon them a new education where they're now subjected to becoming forced labor sources for large plantation owners and big, if you will, rich people of that time. Let's continue with a couple more points here that maybe I can hopefully, again, help you understand the de-education and re-educational process. In 1848, there are 16 manual labor schools. But by 1868, 20 years later, the United States has established 109 manual labor schools of forced labor for Native American people. When we discuss the understandings that Native people have had shoved at them from the westernized perspective, manual labor schools must be put in there as one of the maybe worst examples of how we can see exploitation occurring and the purposeful destruction of Native American people's educational systems. In 1879, we begin to see what's the boarding school system. Many of you are familiar with the boarding school systems. I won't get into deep, if you will, discussion on that, but that is where children were actively taken from their homes, sometimes as age 4 and 5, placed thousands of miles away in what they would call boarding schools. And this was, in fact, to isolate Indian youth and to assimilate them into American culture. The idea of taking children from a parent or from their parents is directly defined in the United Nations definition of genocide that was written after World War II. That if you take children away from their parents, forcefully to place them outside of the regions of their family, that is punishable in the world court system as a genocidal act. The United States of America did not only do it once or twice, they did it over and over and over again, year after year after year, isolating American Indian people, destroying and trying to eliminate languages, destroying and trying to eliminate culture, and taking away those things that were most important to those Indian youth. You probably know that there are many of those schools in our country's history, some which still exist today. Maybe they've changed and hopefully they have a better perspective. In 1924, the Committee of 100, which was a congressional committee set up to look at the American Indian situation in our country. And as the Western European Americans came up with, they concluded that the, quote, final solution for the Indian problem, I have a real problem with the term final solution, as some of you can imagine, is to facilitate grassroots Indians to, and I'm quoting, to think white, unquote. Again, the educational system that was presented to Native people was not one of equality, of looking at each other in balance, but one of imposing and putting upon others the idea, or as they put it, to think white, unquote. They used the BIA, a federally funded program with American taxpayers' money, to utilize their power to go into Native communities and to undermine Native American understandings and Native American teachings. They further used the public school systems, which will be part of my discussion in a moment. But again, I'm trying to give you background to why I think after years and years and years and years and years and years of this, This is not an anomaly. This is your country, our country's practice. Public schools were then also used to facilitate this process. And of course, as I said, I'll discuss that further in a moment. In 1972, when we finally get what could be considered part of the civil rights era, a 1972 Indian Education Act, which was supposed to be some sort of a freedom, if you will, for Native people in learning about their own history, their own culture, their own language, their own ways of thinking and philosophies and literature. It actually said that it allowed for only, and I quote, previously existing programs, unquote. And those only, quote, existed at the discretion of the funding agency, unquote. You give Native American people, quote unquote, the right to their education, but only if the program existed before this educational act, which by the way meant it didn't. And then you tell them, and you can only exist as long as we fund you and say you can exist. That in its fact is an insidious way of dealing, and almost worse than just saying we're not going to let you do anything. In 1975, the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act finally becomes part and parcel of where we sit today. So when I talked to Professor Escamilla about what I was going to talk about, I said to him, I think that many of the people who will be listening to me, and again, I'm no expert, may not even have a basic understanding of what Native American people have been facing for over 400 years in this area now known as the United States of America. And when something has existed for over 400 years, it is not going to go away very easily. It's going to have to be met with some sort of a determination from people in the community like you and me who believe that there is a necessary need for something to change in education. And without that change, without the discussion, we will maintain what we've currently had. I'd like to move to the second part of what I would like to talk about this evening. And that is then the actual discussion about the need for a Native American Studies program. And having that not just at one level, but at all levels of where we can see young children, where we can see young youth, where we can see college educated people walking away with an education that is somewhat inclusive of other people's understandings and not just one perspective that this is what was done and aren't we great for doing it. The historical record of the United States, which I just presented to you very briefly, lacks respect for Native American knowledge and Native American understanding. I don't know how you could argue otherwise. I don't know how you could make even an assertion otherwise, that there was respect at any level for Native American knowledge and Native American understandings. When I get my students talking to me about what, quote unquote, they know about American Indian people, when I talk to members of the community, when I talk to professors, when I talk to people who are in power making decisions that will in one way or another not only affect Native American people, but the regions of Native American areas where we have so many people around us, and they have little or no knowledge whatsoever, it is disheartening to think what kind of a decision will they make for the education of my child and the children that come out of the background in the community that I come from. So the historical record, I argue, lacks respect for that knowledge and that understanding. And in order for us to move forward in any reasonable understanding of humankind, there must be a respect afforded to Native people dealing with Native American knowledge, what they knew to be true, what they understood, what they had as knowledge, and those understandings that came forth from that. To merely dismiss thousands of years of people's knowledge of medicine, of history, of astronomy, of architecture, of music, of all these types of things really shows the lack of respect that our country has had. I would like to talk about an article by Reiner and Johnson. The article's entitled Immersion Education. So in case anybody is taking notes or would like to possibly look at it. They state what I say is the obvious, and I'll just read the quote, and I don't think we need to go too much further into that because we've already put that out on the table. It was government policy to exploit, marginalize, or assimilate indigenous peoples through the schools. Schools were used for centuries to eliminate indigenous languages and cultures. For those of you who have not studied American Indian history and don't know the next thing that I'm going to say, this was a government policy. This was the slogan of the United States of America. This is what they put forth should happen to Native American people. And I quote, "Kill the Indian, save the man," unquote. When you have policies that are driven by a doctrine of kill the Indian, save the man, it would be insane to argue that there's respect for Indian people's knowledge and understanding. And to understand that that has been in the root and continues to be a part of the understanding of American history and its relations to the native people of this region. And by this region, I mean both of the lands of what we call today North and South America. That is a common underlying theme. So it's not just in the United States where the annihilation of Indian people, both physically and culturally, takes place. It happens in Argentina, on La Pampa. It happens in Mexico in places. It happens in Central America. It happens all over. Kill the Indian, save the man. That was a government United States slogan for the American Indian policy that they brought. Reiner and Singh, in a different article called "Overcoming the Legacy of Assimilationist Schooling," further states, and I quote, "Education is not neutral. What children read, what they hear, learn, and do in school can help them build a strong, positive identity. Or it may, through insensitivity and ethnocentric assimilationist curriculum and instruction, destroy indigenous cultures and family values." I think it's obvious what our country has up until this point recently have with its root and what they have been preaching and teaching. I hope that what we're doing this evening, and thank you again, MSJC, for doing this, is an open dialogue to bring out how people have perceived education and the understandings within it. I'd like to go to my second point about the need for what I call Native American or indigenous studies, if you will. The legal precedents of Native American studies. So beyond just Mr. Gomez yelling and screaming into the computer this evening, there actually are things that good human beings who realize human rights, who realize civil rights, who realize ideologies of democracy and so on, there really are some things that people can see, do, and we can share with each other. Number one, the United Nations 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, partial states, if you will, and I quote, "Parents have a prior right to choose the education that shall be given to their children," unquote. I believe that's fundamental. I believe that has to be fundamental. That as a parent and a member of a society in any kind of world that has decency, parents should have the right to be able to know that what's being given to their children and the future generations of this country and this world are things that we believe in, are truthful, are honest and forthright. And that is what the United Nations in 1948 said was part of our human rights. I want you to think about that overarching human right, because even though this evening I'm talking about Native Americans in the United States, what about indigenous peoples all over the world that are suffering at the hands of other nations who sometimes are funded, sometimes are backed by our country, and are denying the future of those children the education that they will need to understand, to grow up and to be something, if you will, of prosperity in this world. The second point that I'd like to talk about, which I think is more important as our discussion continues this evening, because it directly implicates our country. The United States Constitution and US laws and policies have within them numerous recognitions. I have to acknowledge at this point that my very first position as a professor was at Palomar College in the American Indian Studies program. And I have to thank Patty Dixon and Jeannie Dixon for giving me a chance to become a professor and teach. And when they gave me that opportunity to teach American Indian law and policy, I dove into that like I have never dove into anything, because I wanted to make them proud and I wanted to represent our community. And so some of the studies that I've taught and things that I've looked at, including teaching American Indian law and policy of the 20th century at UC Riverside to an upper division course. These are things that came out again in my life and I see and I would like to share with you. In an article by Locus entitled "Wounding the Spirit, Discrimination and Traditional American Indian Belief Systems," she asserts, and I quote, "The formal education process, as well as the standardized achievement and intelligence tests, are designed to assist and measure mental functions desirable to the dominant culture. Their use for other cultures is therefore discriminatory. We all know that discrimination in the United States of America is something that we rail against, at least we say we do. If discriminatory practices are known, and they are known, and if teachers and administrators know that, and they do know that, and they continue facilitating that discriminatory process against Native people and or other cultures, something must be said. Something must be done. Now more than ever, there is a need for people to begin to stand up in decency and say, we understand the discriminatory procedures that we have adhered to for hundreds of years in our country. We will purposefully move against that to end those forms of discrimination, not just for Native American people, but for all people in our society. Letter B. Sovereign status existed prior to European intrusion. Indian people were not made sovereign by Europeans coming here and telling them they could be sovereign. Sovereignty means they had the right to decide for themselves. They had the right to rule the way they wanted, to treat women and children and elders, to look and understand the earth, to create economic systems and political understandings. European people did not have the right or in any way somehow could give or deem sovereignty status onto American Indian people. This is further solidified in the United States Constitution and in all the treaties. And why do I say that? Because the Constitution has within it that only the government can deal one-on-one with the Indian nations and the Indian tribes, the Indian governments. The treaties can only be signed according to, if you will, European law and the jurisprudence that they had for hundreds of years before they met Indian people, that only sovereign nations can sign treaties. You can't sign treaties with a basketball team. You can't sign it with the Girl Scouts. You can only sign those with sovereign recognized nations. And so when the English nation signed, when the United States of America signed treaties with American Indian people, that asserted that those people were sovereign. And as sovereign people, they have the right to decide for themselves. Your own laws have taught you that. Respect your own jurisprudence and your own understandings of the laws. Let American Indian people live as sovereign people and decide what educational understandings they would like for their people. Number 3, democracy as a concept. I'd like to stop there for a moment. I want you to think about that concept of democracy before I move further. The idea that from the people wills power. The idea that people have the right to understand what power they will have and give to those who will represent them in one way or the other. Democracy as a concept is key to the existence of our country, or we will watch this country fall into even greater disarray than it currently stands. In a book by Davis, an excellent book about survival schools, and if you're not familiar with survival schools, these were schools that were created during the time of the American Indian movement, the 1960s and 70s. They were created by Native American people in response to all the things that I've been talking about tonight, as they watched their children not be given a decent education, but be programmed with other people's ideas about the status of women, about the status of immigrants, about the status of the earth, about the status of the air and the water and the animals, about the status of everything that was foreign to them. They watched their children be fed with that. They created what were called survival schools. If you ever get a chance and you're interested, that's a very good book to talk about that topic. I don't have much time on that, but I did want to introduce that Native people have, and I believe will continue to fight back in ways that they can to keep alive their culture, their languages, their understandings, their philosophies, and other things that are important to them. According to Davis in Survival School, she writes, and I quote, "Critical democracy depends and demands that the United States be a nation of educational opportunity for all, not merely a homogenizing and standardizing machine." We have to ask ourselves, if you are an educator out there, I'm pleading with you to think in your heart and your spirit, do the actions that we take benefit the community at large? Do they represent a diversity of thought, not just a diversity of color? Because as she says in letter B, this requires more than a benignly neutral diversity that celebrates cultural differences while muting the ideological forces that privilege certain differences and marginalize others. Let me repeat that one more time. Democracy demands that the United States offer educational opportunity to all, not just a homogenizing and standardizing machine. And that would require that more than benignly neutral diversity occurs. We don't just celebrate cultural differences by selling fry bread. We don't just celebrate it by bringing some Latino person on to talk about whatever their art form is. We talk about why there is an important cultural differences within the peoples. And we don't just mute out through our own processes some people while giving other people privilege. In fact, that is a partial definition of racism, isn't it? The granting of privilege and the denying of privilege to some or the others based upon their phenotypical presentation. Democracy depends upon it. We must think about what our role is as educators. Are we merely here to repeat, or are we here to push the envelope, to ask for change where change is needed? And in those words, if we cannot be the force of change, then allow those who can be the force of change the opportunity and the advantage to make the change that we can't do. Democracy as a concept is crucial to our existence in this country. I fear for it in our current time. But I ask that if we look at and try to understand Native American perspective of balance and democracy, maybe we could, in one way or the other, move forward in a good way. My last point on this area is just what we heard, that we cannot mute ideological understandings. And so I call this the unmuting of ideological forces of privilege. I just put this out as food for thought. I would like for you to think about it. And maybe in your own way, if you are an educator or a student, if you are a parent or a community member, try to think about your role. We'll talk about that more before I bring it to questions and answers. Some of you may know Deloria as one of the premier Native American educational minds. And in an article, Deloria and Wildcat argue in Power and Place Indian Education in America that, quote, human personality, the existence of humans, human personality was derived from accepting the responsibility to be a contributing member of our society. And therefore, education was something for the tribe, not for the individual. That is so foreign to what you and I are taught in the colleges and universities. It is so foreign to what we're taught in kindergarten through 12, that education is something for me, for the personal individual to benefit and move on. And if others are left behind because of my privilege to education, that's not my business. For Native Americans, an understanding that's been muted, that's been pushed to the side by those who came with an individualist, forward-moving, progress, linear understanding of the world. Education is something for the entire community, not just for an individual. We must restructure for the future of humankind with that understanding. I say to my students all the time, and I say to any student that's listening to me right now, if you are going to a system that has been funded by the public, if you are at MSJC, San Bernardino Valley College, UC Riverside, Cal State San Bernardino, it doesn't matter, any school from kindergarten through university that's paid for by the public, do we not have a responsibility to that? Do we not know that Mr. Jones, who is a bricklayer and will never ever get to go to college, and maybe even his children won't because of the economic disadvantage that his family may face, but the taxes that come out of his paycheck, the taxes that come out of Mrs. Nguyen's paycheck, who sells goods on the market down the street, from Mrs. Cervantes or from Mr. Jones, all of them who may never go to college, but whose taxes are taken so that you and I can be educated, do we not owe them something in return? Was education and all that they paid for and lived for just so that Mr. Gomez could get a degree, become a teacher, and fuck everybody else? Was that what it was about? Or is education for all of us, not just an individual? Do we not have a responsibility as the educated force of our society to return that education so that others may benefit from what we got from their families, from their communities? I think that what Deloria and Wildcat argues here is fundamental to understanding a different perspective of education. So often I have taught, and students have come to me because they're there to get rich. They're going to get a good job. They're going to get this, they're going to get that. But nowhere in that educational process did somebody teach them and tell them, imbue in them that they have a role. They have a duty as part of an educated force of society to return that education to the benefit of our community, not just to one individual. Letter B, Deloria in Indian Studies, the orphan of academia. He further writes, the Indian Studies program must define their goals as encompassing all relative knowledge and information concerning the relationship between American Indians and the rest of the world. The key there is relationship. That for Native people, their understanding of relationship and that responsibility of relationship, just as we talked about above, cannot be disengaged, cannot be removed from, cannot be a separate part of our existence. The knowledge that we have of place, of the sacredness of the land, of the sacredness of the things and the animals and the plants and the resources of that land. As you heard at the very beginning, the acknowledgement of those whose land we sit upon is something that's long overdue. and to acknowledge that this was and is and will remain the land of those people is to recognize the understanding that Indian people have about their relationship with everything and everybody in the rest of the world. It cannot be removed from their understanding. Linguists will tell you about the polysynthetic construction of Native American language. Look it up. Polysynthetic construction of language. That means that the way Indian people spoke, the way they expressed their ideas, was to merge words and ideas into each other, always showing relationship between things. Because if you're related to that person on the street, if you're related to that student in your classroom, if you're related to that animal in the field, if you're related to the tree, then you will have more respect. You will live in balance and understand the world in a whole different way. When you live in a world of hierarchy, linear progression and progress, then those who get left behind, well, that's just what happens. It's a discussion of the Western world that has dominated academia for years, whether it was evolutionary processes, social Darwinism, hierarchy, whatever classist issues. Clearly, relationship is whole different understanding for some parts of the world than it is for Native America. Letter C. Again, in DeLorean Wildcat Power Place in Indian Education in America, they finally argue that self-determination, the ability for a people to run and rule and control and teach their society the way they want. Self-determination, therefore, contingent upon the extent to which education serves to enhance and to maintain that relationship. And more poignantly, the personalities that constitute a place. There is more to the land than just buying and selling that piece of property so that you can have a nice home. There is more to the land than just selling it for some upcoming mall. There is more to the land and the place that you come from. And Native people knew that. And their relationship with the land and the place was taught because it was important for all existence. Now more than ever, a need for Native American education and understanding, indigenous values are crying out to our culture as we watch the erosion of our environment, as we watch the, if you will, disrespect of Native people, of people of color, as we watch the disengagement of poor people, as we watch the exploitation of our brothers and sisters of immigrant, as we watch what happens to women, as we watch what happens all across this country and much of the world. Now more than ever, there's a need for you and I to understand even more what Native people have in their, if you will, arsenal of understandings. And that takes me to my final point here. Accepting responsibility for education. It's very difficult for educators to take that responsibility. And the reason I say that is, I'm not sure how many of us, and I'm not talking about the good people who are trying, I'm talking about those who are controlling the educational process. I'm not sure how many of them really want to educate. See, there's a difference between education, isn't there, and programming, or just making people regurgitate or relive or resubmit the same ideas. When my students give me the same thing that the author wrote out of the book back to me, basically verbatim, I tell them that's not what I wanted from you. At the college level, we don't ask you to repeat the right answer. We ask you to tell us what's the right answer. How do you know and why is it the right answer? And how does it fit into the overall discussion that we're having? That's education, isn't it? To just repeat the same stuff that your mentors or your teachers told you, which in many cases may have been misinformation, particularly about Native people, really is a disservice to education. And we shouldn't call it education then. We should call it programming. Davis writes of Education in Survival Schools, that same book. If schools can become places where children are free to learn, to question and grow from a position that affirms who they are, then it will have the power to create a more just and equitable system for all. If children cannot be free to question and learn and grow from what affirms them, then it is not equitable. And therefore, it's not really education. It's a programming system. In order for it to be equitable, children have to be able to be affirmed in their ideas and their understandings and the things that have come to them from their communities, their families, their elders, their relations, their understandings of the earth and its surroundings. And finally, Noriega asserts in American Indian education in the United States, indoctrination for subordination to colonialism, that American Indian studies, and I quote, may ultimately prove to be the Archimedean point from which false consciousness can be breached, setting in motion the process leading to a more comprehensive emancipation from colonialism and oppression, not only for Native Americans, but for everybody else as well. I leave you with my title again. Now more than ever, we are called upon as educators, as members of our community, as people who care. We are called upon to search for answers outside of the proverbial box. And one of those areas where I believe we have been remiss and have not done service good is in the area of American Indian studies and trying to understand what knowledge and what understandings those brothers and sisters bring to us. I thank you for your time. I appreciate you listening to me. I hope that I gave you something to think about. Thank you very much.
Ed, thank you so much. We have a couple of questions that we want to forward to you. There's one that just came on the screen right now, and it's the following. Do we begin to build a new system of education rather than conditioning one classroom at a time, one mind at a time, one conversation at a time? Question.
So that's the key there. How do we do it? And I think the society has to come up with the answer to that. I can't give you the answer. I believe that, as you've seen, and as I think I hopefully argued somewhat persuasively, the system has been tainted from the very beginning. So if you have just a little bit of arsenic in your food, is that okay? I think you know the answer to that. A little bit of arsenic will kill you as much as a whole dose of arsenic. So you want to nibble on it slowly and eat it, or do you want to eat the whole block? I think that we're going to have to look at restructuring education. And it's going to have to come with understandings that people will need to be open to new ideologies and new ways of looking at the world. The 500 years that we have had of colonial rule in this world, and I say the world, of indigenous peoples in the world, have rooted but nothing but poor conditions of existence at every level. And if the educational system that we currently have is tainted with that, I'm not sure, Professor Escamilla, if we can save that as just part of the arsenic and put it into the whole recipe and then serve it to everybody else.
Very well. Before I pass it over to the other panelists here, I do have a question. I was going through your notes with you pretty much, mano a mano, just kind of going through each one of them. You mentioned the advancement of the Native Americans by certain.
Uh-oh, you froze there. Professor Escamilla froze. Professor Escamilla, you
that
froze.
Congress had enacted, right?
So
Still strong.
We got you freezing. You're freezing there. So we need you to come back at us. Maybe Professor Torres.
Do they still hold strong? Have they withered?
So Professor Escamilla, you on my end, you froze. I can't hear a single word you were saying. So either repeat that, or if anybody else heard them, can they give me his question? I could not hear it. I'm sorry.
I couldn't hear his question either. So
I'm sorry.
So let's get a different question, and we'll come back to you, Professor Escamilla, because you froze there for a moment.
Very good. John, do you have a question? Carlos, are there any questions on your end?
Okay, let's go back to Professor Escamilla then.
Oh, okay, so here we are. So you touched on some of the laws that Congress passed, right, to advance the Native Americans here in the U.S. Are those laws still strong? Are they funded? Are they enacted? Where are they now? Are they there, but they're kind of shelved? What's your opinion on that?
So I'm not sure which ones in particular you're referring to. If you're talking about the last couple in what we call the era of self-determination and American Indian policy, those laws are still current. In many cases, they still do stand. They are worked upon regularly. If you're a person who studies American Indian policies and procedures in our country, they are here, and then they're here, and then they're here. And so, you know, we've had several that dealt with American Indian religion. We've had several that deal with American Indian children and families. We've had several that deal with treaty rights. So each time American Indian people are in one way or the other able to push forth something, it is really incremental. The United States of America, I think, through my discussion, at least I hope I made it somewhat clear, is reluctant to give up any power or any movement outside of what they can control. So what happens is it's incremental. We see American Indians making a move, pushing it an inch, then they can push it another inch. And the society as a whole, because of its ignorance of Native American policy, procedures, laws, the traditional history of our country and what we've done, because of that, really cannot help or support, because they themselves have little knowledge whatsoever. Myself, I don't even have enough knowledge probably to do what's necessary, but I at least have some to know what has been happening along and therefore argue something needs to tip this over. And it's not yet tipped over. It is continual pushback from the American Indian, from the American government against Native nations, and it's not being facilitated in a way that's helpful. It's actually hindering and continues to hinder. Now, Indian people are resilient. I mean, if you talk about resilient, 500 years of annihilation, of practices to destroy whatever they could try to destroy, right? And they're still here, as you can see, right? You can see there's brothers and sisters on this panel. There are people still in our community who are resisting and persisting, right? But it is not without pushback and without the help of the general public, and that can only help if the general public is educated. Otherwise, they're going to talk about all kinds of nut crazy stuff that I heard during Proposition 1, Proposition 5. I mean, it's nuts about how all Indian people have money. They're all own casinos. They're all millionaires. Gomez has his own house on an island. I mean, I get, you know, I've taken my son to people that we know their houses to have, you know, musical lessons when he was 4 or 5. And every time I would see their children who were in their 30s, they want to know how much money I have, how much casino am I rich, what kind of, you know, how much money you get. It was always about its craziness. And in reality, that hinders the discussion, because misinformation, as you well know, living in the 2020, misinformation can destroy a conversation and completely send it off track awry. So yes, there are laws that are currently still in existence, not the original ones I talked about, and not even probably the next 2/3, but those bottom ones in the era of self-determination, Indian Education Acts and stuff like that, those are still in existence and have been furthered and worked upon over the last 30, 40 years.
Very good. John, can you take the question that was paused to us, please?
Which question here?
It just came across right now. It's towards the bottom.
How does this dialogue into the federal government? How do you get this
Yes.
dialogue into the federal government? Who can make proposals? Who can we fund an educational system that will address this? I think what I see happening in Indian country is, I think a lot of Native people are now in that educator role now more than ever before. And I think that change is going to happen internally. I mean, I taught at Saley College, and a big part of what they taught there was, an indigenous way of learning. The Institute for American Indian Arts, I taught there. That big focus in the liberal studies program is an indigenous way of knowing. So it's changing not just what is taught, but even the whole mindset upon which these ideas are taught in. When I teach American Indian history, one of my very first lectures, after I talk about who gets to be an Indian and that kind of stuff, is, I go through some of those pieces of legislation, and I end with, how old, when were your parents born? And they're like, 1980 or whatever, and 1978. And I said, well, just keep in mind, within your parents' generation, 1978 was the first time Indian people could even practice their own religion under the American Indian Freedom Act. That's recent. That's not ancient history. We're not talking like, some livestock policy from the 40s and 50s. This is something that happened within your parents' memory, if they were aware of those kinds of things. So I think, there is some change coming, and I agree that slow incremental change at the federal level, by the time it trickles down, is just, it's not going to happen. I think, beginning with Vine and all these other folks, Philip these days, and other folks that are in that realm are saying, okay, let's educate our own educators at this point and just get a different mindset going. So bringing a dialogue to the government is, the dialogue's been there. I mean, Suzanne's been up there screaming for decades, and it's, talk about baby steps. So no, it's almost time for like, okay, we've been saying where are us people? Well, some of us are here now. Let's all start thinking about doing something a little differently. At least that's my perspective.
So,
I agree with Professor Torres. I think that's important. And I think the next important part is we have to find allies in the mainstream population of people who can also begin to realize that the way they've been taught, the way they looked at the world, the understandings that they've had about the environment, about women, about people, about the economy, about politics, about all, is not working. It's not working for a lot more than just Native people. And if they can maybe at least try to wrap their minds around some different perspectives, there's a chance of an opportunity for our world to maybe realign in some ways. And so I agree that it's important that we have members of our community teaching and being a part of that discussion. And hopefully we'll reach more than just a handful of Native people that we get to teach at the college level. And that's why I said it has to happen at all levels, because when I get, and I'm sure it's the same with you, Professor Torres, when I get 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, it's really not too late, but it's late. They have a foundation underneath them that is, I'm going to have to dig down into the earth to remove that foundation to replace it. And at my level and your level, we shouldn't have to be removing the foundation. The foundation should have been there for us to build upon. And so when I say all levels of education, we must restructure the way that our kindergarten through 12th grade teachers teach Native and understand Native. That must be looked at in economic classes, political classes, art classes, classes that deal with science, right? And incorporate new ways and new understandings. Otherwise, by the time we get them, and even if there are hundreds of American Indian Studies programs in college and university level, the level of people that we reach at that level is minuscule to the main population. And in many people's worlds, they're foreign to college universities. So we've got to get further than that. And I agree with you. Hopefully it'll start soon.
Yeah, another example of that is, and this is what I hear from students coming right out of high school, where in the high school textbook, history books, they still talk about the Clovis first model of peopling across the Beringia. That has been debunked in anthropology for 20 years. I mean, those first publications showing that Beringia wasn't it and Clovis wasn't first, that people have been here 20, 30,000 years, that's been completely proven in the world of archaeology and anthropology, literally since the 80s. Yet it's still, the people came across from Asia down to the Bering Strait. And it's like, why are you telling that story anymore? I mean, no one believes that anymore in the world, in the profession, but that's still chapter 1 in the history books in our high schools and elementary schools and whatever. And it's like, wait a second, catch up to the field. I can understand there's a lag, but a 25, 30-year lag? Yeah, that's too long.
I have a question for both. This is for both Professor Ed and Professor Torres. My colleague with me, Cynthia Garcia, we attended a committee today, which we're trying to get Chicano studies, Black studies up and running here at MSJC. We're a very passionate group. We're a group that wants to advance that agenda. We want to push it forward. We know it takes time through curriculum. We know it takes time to get approval, but you know what? Now is the time to get it going. It doesn't matter how long it takes. It's just we're getting it going. On the advancement side, on the maybe on the, let's keep it on the state level. Let's say at the community college level. Do we see the advancement of Native American studies really morphing up in the community college or even at the CSU or UC level? I mean, do you see that growth pattern? Is it stagnant? Where is it at? As far as course offerings, as far as courses, you know, their students can get educated. I mean, is it thriving or is it stalled or it's just there?
So Professor Torres, I'll let you answer that first if you'd like.
Sure, I think the interest is there. I think the student body is there. I think there's Native and non-Native students that are interested in programs like that are specific to, you know, women's studies or African American studies, Chicano studies, etc. But I think it really comes down to funding and the kind of support they get at the admin level. I mean, when I started at UCR, there was a whole department for African American studies. It was a department for women's studies, etc., and including Native American studies. By the time I graduated, they lumped it all together and called it ethnic studies that had 2 white males and a Black woman as their professors. And it's like, well, wait a second, what happened? What happened to all the Chicanos? What happened to all the, you know, the Asians and the American Indians? And it's because, well, they just kept saying, well, we don't have funding for all those departments. So I think the story is that, you know, there's no interest and therefore we're shrinking the departments. I don't know if that's really true. I mean, I certainly, with my students, I see, you know, they're interested in this kind of stuff. And, you know, I talk about some of these issues. I talk about the mascot issue and some of these other, you know, the DAPL issue. There's right now in Governor Newsom's office, AB 275, which gives repatriation rights to non-state federally recognized tribes, non-federally recognized tribes here in California. So, you know, there's lots of stuff happening even at the state level in terms of, you know, Indian law and legislation. And I do my best to bring it up whenever I hear about this kind of stuff. So I think the interest is there, and I just at some of the big universities, there's not an interest. I mean, we have you know, American Indian Studies program here, even at MSJC. It's, you know, and not a heck of a lot of courses with it, but we feed into San Marcos and some of the other schools for those that are interested. But I know they go to ethnic studies when they leave here because there's no, at least not at the UC, not at UCR anymore, as far as I know. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree with Professor Torres. It's kind of a mixed bag. There is a strong move on the right to destroy these as you know, creating barriers between different ethnic groups and different people. Everybody should be the same. We're all American. They don't need their own stuff. That just takes away from good American, you know, understanding. So there's that. And then on the other side, there is a strong push for ethnic studies and understandings in other areas. The California State Universities just made that a requirement for graduation. We know that many of the schools in the state of California, high school levels, are now pushing for that. Community colleges are working on that. I think, you know, the point of money is a big issue, but more importantly, the lack of understanding. Because I think what will happen is if money gets in there and it's not utilized in a way that people understand, then it's a waste of time. It's a waste of my money. And why should I be doing that? So again, people have to have some sort of a basis for understanding. And the last thing I think that when we're talking about how people perceive Native American studies and that those ideologies, is there's no understanding whatsoever for the major society. And so if it doesn't make money, and remember that's a diatribe of the university colleges, that's why you're there, to make money. And if it doesn't, then why should we have it? So slowly, we've been seeing a lot of these classes being pushed to the side as not essential to a degree, not essential to you getting out of here in 2 years, not essential to you. And so they've been kind of pushed to the side, and we're seeing less and less of that, occurring at the college level. That's why I'm saying the leadership in our colleges and universities really have to ask themselves the question, are they educators or are they promoters of programming and repeating what has been done for 500 years? And I would argue that at this point, many times, unfortunately, the administration, even if there are good people, are tied by the hands of funding and what's happened in the past. And that's just what it is. And we're moving forward this way, right? And we're doing that. And if it's not something that they've had or believe in, then it's no good.
I just want to piggyback on that a little bit. I think that this description of it being a mixed bag is very accurate. I think where it can succeed and where it's sustainable requires a real collaboration and a unified vision. You know, students who are really wanting programs, faculty who are really committed to it, administrators, you know, committed to it, and community members as well. And when you can bring all those elements together, you can build a sustainable program.
Cynthia, do you have a comment, something you'd like to say for us? Anything?
So, Professor Gomez, like as Elias is asking me, I'm like, oh, he's so thorough that everything he's saying, I'm like, yes, you know, it's really difficult to have a comment after that, given everything you're saying, because it's so true. You know, we have students, we have, you know, we have that pushback. Students want those programs. Administrators want those programs, you know, counseling, professors, we all want those programs. And, you know, and it's so difficult, especially being in the area that we're in, that it calls for something like that, right? And at the same time, I think people have this notion of only, you know, Native American students want to take those programs, or only Chicanos want to take those programs. And that's not the case. I think it's important to also educate the non-Native Americans and non-Chicanos, you know, right? Because we want to make sure that we educate everybody as a whole, because that's the beauty of diversity. That's the beauty of us trying to educate everybody about our cultures. And, you know, and I love the fact that you're saying, yeah, like we all need to come together as far as, you know, administration and everybody on top to ensure, like, what are we here for? Are we here to, you know, really make money? Or are we here to educate our students and give them that educational background? But not just that. It's not just about coming to college. And as a counselor, for me, it's not about coming to college and me creating an education plan, or in my classes just going by my syllabus and just teaching them, you know, the study skills. It's really about having an impact on their life, you know, and making sure that they're ready in the world, especially in the diverse world that we live in. I mean, California on its own and SoCal on its own is a very diverse place. You know, we have so many people here, and, you know, and I think I've always, you know, thanks to my mom, she's always explained that education is like your number one out of, you know, getting out of poverty. But my biggest thing is, you know, understanding our cultura, right? Understanding where we're come from. And I think it's vital for students, whether that you're in university level, college level, to understand other cultures, you know. And I tell our incoming students in our new student counseling sessions, hey, take these classes, not because, you know, we're telling you to, but why not enrich your soul, enrich, you know, the fact that there's other cultures that are equally as beautiful. It's not going to make you any less American, right? It's not going to make you any less Chicana. Just go ahead and learn about other cultures, because, you know, I think that's a great way for us to show our students how to grow, not just academically, but on a more personal level. So I appreciate everything you're saying, because, you know, just like Elias, you know, said that there was conversations about, you know, an ethnic studies class and Chicano studies class, and we're so excited, but we also are coming from like different areas, like, how are we going to do this? Because they have the backing, we want to do it. We just want to make sure, okay, you know, what's the best way to be able to do this? Because it's needed, it really is. So thank you for that.
Very good. Well, listen, I think Jose's probably pretty much just taken all the questions that we have from the audience, and we still got a good collective audience out there listening to us. So it's awesome that even at this the tail end of this event, we still have a good showing. So we're good. We're good. In closing, I just wanna thank the following people. Obviously, Jose. Cynthia, thank you for chiming in. Thank you for being here. John, thank you so much. Really appreciate your insight and your willingness to help out on the panel. Hermano, what can I say? Ed, I really appreciate you accepting the invitation to be with us.
Thank you for the honor.
I'm indebted to you, but we'll catch up later on that. but any final words, Ed? Any final thoughts? Anything for us on the panel, and really for our audience that's still listening to us? Go ahead and close us with some final thoughts and words, please.
Yeah, again, I would hope that the message that I brought was one of inclusivity, but that means that you have to be willing to listen and learn. We often, particularly as educated, quote unquote, people, believe that we've learned. And I will share real quickly kind of a turning point in my life that made something important. I was in a place called Tzintzuntzan in Mexico, outside of Lago Pátzcuaro. I don't know how many are familiar with that area. And I was with some indigenous brothers and sisters, and somehow word got to an elderly woman that I was in town and that I was basically, asking questions and so on and so forth. And she said, "Bring him to me." And when I entered her little casita, the floors were made out of dirt. And I saw her in the corner, a 98-year-old woman, probably, I would say, age somewhere between 95 and 100 years old. Mm-hmm. She was picking up the dirt or the clay to prepare to make pottery. And she said, "Son, I need you to sit down." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "You think because you've gone to the universities and learned from those people who pretend that they know the world, that you know what you're supposed to do. I have news for you." And for the next hour or two, as she sat there blind, probably about 80 or 90 pounds, 98-year-old woman, 99, whatever, in that dark dirt floor, one room home with had no furniture. She broke down stuff for me that I needed to know. And had I not been open to that, had I not listened to that, the path that I was on may have gone in a different manner. I don't know. But it is clear that what I learned at the colleges and universities was helpful to me. But it was not the end-all, be-all of information. And if I need and can say, those things that are brought to us about who we are can come from places if we're open to them. And so my asking of the audience this evening who are listening out there is I hope you listened to what I said tonight. You don't have to move over to my end of the world or want to believe and be who I am, but be open. Be open. Unfortunately, our colleges and universities are not open. In general consensus, there is a program to which things have to be done to prove that it's real, to prove that it's the right thing, to prove, right? And those processes have been tainted and in many cases imbalanced for many years. If not, why has it taken so long for women to be participatory? If not, why has it taken so long for Blacks to be participatory? If not, why has it taken so long for poor people to be participatory? If not, why has it taken so long for LGBTQ plus community to be participant? If not, right? It is clear that there is information in the universities and colleges. You should take as much as you can. But there are also information in our communities. There are informations that are available to us from places that maybe you've never looked at before. And when you open yourself to that, the stories and the things that you will hear will change your life. And so I want to thank you again, like I said earlier, for doing this. It is not commonplace, and it should be. It should be that every month, not just Indigenous Peoples Month or Latino Heritage Month or whatever, there should be conversations constantly pushing us to think beyond what we already know so that we can grow, we can share, and we can become what we really can become. But in isolation, because I control and I know more than you, we will never grow. We'll never become what we could have become. And unfortunately, because the universities have had a history of domination, and as I showed you, education as a whole, not just for Native people, we really are in need of this discussion. So I would just leave it with that. I'd like to thank people like John Torres who are teaching over there. Thank you very much, John, for holding the fort over there. I taught Chicano history and Chicano sociology over there for years, and you guys, you're pushing it, man. I really appreciate that. I'm in a good place, man. I'm 98% people of color, and raza, and brothers and sisters, and when they're there. So you guys keep pushing, and if I can ever be of help, where I'm at. I do claim Elias as my brother, so even publicly I'll do that, and just ask him where I'm at. I'm always down, and if you guys ever feel the need to contact me and want to come over and talk at Valley College or virtually as we're doing right now, you just let me know. Thank you, MSJC, for all you do. Be strong, carry on, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a few ideas with you this evening.
Thank you, Ed. We really appreciate that. Well, we got Dr. Tavares has some closing comments, and so we're going to pass it over to him as we come to a close. Dr. Tavares, take it away, please.
Gracias, Professor Gomez, for sharing your knowledge and your passion with us here tonight at MSJC. You've given us a lot to think about as we kind of work our way to move forward and try to make MSJC a better place. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. Thank you, members of the audience who joined us on YouTube. The recording will be available for you to watch again. I know I'm going to watch it again, just go over some of those notes that Professor Gomez had. But this event will be there as well. You'll find the other Native American Heritage Month events available for you to watch. So that concludes this evening event. Thank you very much. Be safe. Good night and have a great evening.
All right. And we've ended the stream.
All right.